it play and call it work.
Hey everybody, Matthew here from MiniWarGaming.com, filming from Warhammer World, where we've been all week playing games, going on Warhammer TV, and filming interviews. And I am here with Joe Logan from Games Workshop.
Hello, how you doing?
And so Joe is the manager of the, okay, let me see if I can remember the name of the department, the Hobby and Scenery Department? Or what's the exact name of the department?
It is the Hobby Product Studio.
Hobby Product Studio. And if I recall correctly, and then I'll ask you some questions, of course, that is where you actually create all of the hobby-related products that are sold by Games Workshop, such as dice, scenery, measuring tapes, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything that isn't a miniature or a book.
Awesome. How long have you been working for Games Workshop?
14 years this year.
How long in this position?
3. 3 years.
Well, what did you do beforehand?
I worked in the retail stores, so I spent a long time in retail around London.
Awesome. So, getting this job, like, what was kind of your opinion on how it immerses you in the hobby, or how much you like it, or how do you like this job? I guess I should say.
So when I first applied for the job, it was to work in a scenery department, and that was absolutely right up my alley. And then I didn't realise that the department did paints and glues and brushes and stuff as well. So it was awesome. It was a nice surprise when I came along, and it's just been phenomenal. So yeah,
it's the whole area. So when you say the scenery is right up your department, what do you mean by that?
So when I was in retail, and certainly as a hobbyist in the real world for myself, I'm a massive fan of scenery, kit bashing scenery, making tables, armies on parade. So scenery is really a big part of my personal hobby. I
definitely agree with that. I find I'd like to train more than the models. That I find that it's more important for me to have a nice battlefield than it is to have perfectly painted models. Now, I don't really have well-painted models, but I just like to train more. I find that sets it up a lot nicer. So, okay, so let's talk about that a bit. So you cover a lot of the different areas, but at the same time, a lot of the products are still made with the injection molding, all that kind of stuff, all the plastic models. So how does that jive then with the other departments who are actually working on models then? Where does there crossover? Do you share certain talent, or do you have your own sculptors, your own 3D modelers, your own printers, all that kind of stuff?
We absolutely have our own scenery design team. We've got a guy called Ray Dranfield and Dave Andrews, the legend that is Dave Andrews. He made the old How to Make Wargames terrain book.
We use that book quite a bit. Dave and I use that a lot when we first got into the hobby. That's a long time ago, because we're talking 10 years ago we bought that book. Dave's behind the camera right now. And we loved that book. We absolutely loved it. I hammered so many cliffs out of the size of styrofoam when we were playing Lord of the Rings. It was awesome. So that's weird. That brings me back. So sorry, continue.
That's right. Yeah. So those guys, their job is to make and produce our terrain, whether that be through physical prototyping, CAD designing. So it's a very similar process as miniature design, but obviously on a much bigger scale.
You find it's difficult to make it so that they can be intercompatible and all that? Because I've noticed a lot of the terrain now that's been coming out, lots of terrain has been coming out recently, actually, with Armageddon's release and now Necromunda's release. There's a lot of these kits that are designed to interlock and work together. Is that complicated? Is that hard to do?
It takes a lot of planning and concepting at the beginning. So the Sector Mechanicus terrain that came out alongside Shadow War Armageddon, and certainly the plasma pipes, the conduits and the plasma generators, or the regulators, that we're releasing at Christmas, they're all compatible. But that's because the fittings and the modular design was the first thing that was created by those guys. So they kind of made the system, the fitting system, and then created the aesthetic of the terrain around that system. And now we're really seeing the benefit of that, because we can just start adding kits to that range, and they all fit together. And actually, you'll find that in the coming years that all of our 40k terrain will be entirely interactive and modular with itself. So certainly that's the dream. Whether that when that starts spilling through, you'll start noticing it more and more.
Well, you can see a lot of that in the exhibition hall. You can see the kind of the development of the terrain, that now that they have access to the Sector Mechanicus stuff, or Sector Mechanicus? Is that?
Sector Mechanicus, yeah.
Sector Mechanicus. You see a lot of it used everywhere in ways that I wouldn't even thought to use it. Just looking at them like, how did you build that? I'm like, oh, those are those two pieces, and that piece just turned sideways, and all of a sudden you got this new thing. And of course they have that imagination to be able to take those pieces. So I've seen a lot of the new displays utilize a lot more of those parts, rather than having to scratch build things and outsource to other stuff, because obviously they have to wherever you don't have the terrain. So as opposed to model releases, obviously model releases are just like all the time. How does the release schedule work when it comes to terrain?
What we try and do is we have terrain ranges that are standalone. So, for example, the Sector Mechanicus range came out alongside Shadow War, but that was just where we managed to fit it in amongst our miniature releases. So what we try and do is try and find gaps in our miniature launches, try and make sure that our terrain fits with the aesthetic of our future miniatures, and you know, release it alongside something appropriate. You know, so the Shadow War Armageddon stuff was a no-brainer. You know, there's no kill teams fighting over, you know, those great sci-fi aesthetics. You know, so you've got, you know, you kind of got the factory, the warehouse, the ironworks. You know, you got nice, thin, narrow corridors, lots of line of sight blocking pieces. So it made sense for that to come out alongside Shadow War Armageddon and that sort of, you know, squad mentality and squad sort of game mechanic. But to be honest with you, what's nice about scenery is it's not bound to a release. It's not bound to a certain miniature type. You know, your miniatures are your characters. They're the characters in your story, whereas the terrain in your scenery, well, that's your narrative right there. That is the bulk and the foundation of your story, and that isn't bound to anything. So we can change that as and when we can, and get as much, as many releases out as possible.
Yeah, definitely. Now, the Sector Mechanicus, that was a huge release compared to a lot of the other ones that you've done. You'd come out with, like, here's some forest, or here's some fights, and then all of a sudden, Sector Mechanicus. So, like, how long did it take to go from the concept to development of that particular range that was released with Armageddon?
That was a long time. So that was about 19 months from start to finish. So
19 months before it was released is when they said, yes, we want to do this. And then 19 months later is when it finally came out, something like that?
Kind of. So when we sort of concept a scenery range, we don't ever think about what that range is going to look like. We think about what hole that's going to fill. So we thought, actually, we don't have a fully modular system in our 140,000 scenery range. So actually, we need to start thinking about that. What does it need to do? It needs to be line of sight blocking. We need to have wider walkways and corridors to so you can put obviously the 32 mil bases onto those walkways. So squads have got bigger. Okay, so we had a list of questions we needed to answer with our new scenery range. As soon as we've worked out how big a thing has to be, what its function on the battlefield has to be, that's when we start going, okay, so what could that actually be? Is that a ship dockyard, or is that a factory, or is that actually a city, or actually is it a death world? No, actually we don't have a factory environment. Okay, well, let's start looking at that, and then the look and the feel of the scenery sort of flows afterwards.
Do you find it hard to have that long turnaround time? Do you find that like, I know for myself, when we do our video production, I can quickly want to move on to the next project, and we're talking like 2 or 3 months into a project. I'll be like, I'm kind of done with this, I want to move on, but I still have to finish it, obviously, but in my mind I'm like ready to move on to the next, and that's just 2 or 3 months. So you're talking like a year or two. Obviously you have multiple projects on the go, but do you ever find that you just want a project to be done and out of the way so you can move on to the next thing?
No, actually, it's actually quite the opposite. The hardest thing about a long lead time is you get halfway through the project and you're like, oh, we could do this as well, and the Sector Mechanicus is a great example, because we got to the end of that, we're like, yeah, this is really cool, really happy with it. Oh, what if we did some plasma pipes? Because plasma's cool. Oh, right, but actually, well, what is that plasma? Oh, it's thermic plasma. What's thermic plasma? Oh, right, actually, so that's plasma that has been turned into a fuel, but it's not weaponized plasma. Oh, right, well, how does that work? And then, so we need something to regulate that. So we did some regulators as well, some platforms, and then there's obviously other stuff we've got in mind as well. But the releases just continue to stack up, and the ideas and the concepts. And the great thing about scenery is that you can just bounce ideas, constantly developing and evolving until you've got yourself a massive range. And I think the Sector Mechanicus stuff, well, we're not finished. We might have launched that, and that might be out there and being used, and it's a fantastic addition to our 40k scenery. But that's not over. We'll pick that up in a couple of years and go, ooh, what else can we add to that? Okay, so we've done thermic plasma. So how actually, what does industry look like around those factories? Okay, cool. So are the containers. The containers we've launched. Can you transport plasma in that? Or actually, is thermic plasma the only thing that goes through these factories and this sort of industrial zone? Well, what else can we do? Well, what does a weapons factory look like? Oh, actually, what does a tank factory look like? So it just drags up loads and loads of questions, which we can then shelve and answer, as and when we get a chance to. So,
well, there's an infinite amount of possibilities for terrain. Now, obviously, the Imperial side or the Imperium side of Warhammer 40k is a big seller, so we see more support for that side of it. We do have a bit of Xenos terrain or even Chaos terrain. More so in Age of Sigmar, but we do see that as well in 40k. So, are there any, without maybe going into any details that you're not allowed to go into, are there plans to cover more Xenos terrain, such as more Eldar, Tau, even Tyranid, Orcs, those kind of things? Is there any plans to do that?
So we experimented a few years ago with some Xenos terrain. So we started with the Tau. The Tidal Wall and the Ramparts. So we brought that out, must be 2 years ago now, and that was a bit of an experiment to see how Xenos terrain works and whether there's much interest for it. And actually, it was great. It was great, and we tried to touch on that again with the Deathwell Forest. We released the Eldritch Ruins. I think what it's told us is that there is definitely a place for Xenos terrain in our 40k scenery offer. I can't go into much more.
So there's definitely a place, and you can't go into much more. Okay, well, we can. I think we can. It doesn't mean anything soon, of course, or reading between, or anything at all. But I'm glad to hear that. I know that's a challenge, and I know there are aftermarket places to get it. But it's always nice when it's more official, because some of the aftermarket ones do a good job, of course. Because the thing I love about terrain is there's no way one company can do it all, because you can just choose one part of the range and build a company around that. We've seen companies just do that, where I've seen like hundreds of products, all just this type of building, and they really go all out with that. So it's impossible for one company to. But at the same time, I love the plastic, the sector mechanical. It's also the fact that it's canon. Like if Games Workshop puts this out, then we know that this is canon. This is what something looks like. Here's one thing, more of a request than a question, because I highly doubt that you're doing this, or maybe going to, but I'm still going to put the request out there. One thing that we don't see often in pictures or in scenery or anything else is the day-to-day items. Like, what does a chair look like in the 40K, in the 41st millennium? What does it look like?
Well, what does chair look like? What does a bed look like?
Is it just like a regular bed with skulls on the end? Or is every chair a throne? But I'm serious. Like, is it all just Victorian looking? Because obviously we have 1 trillion worlds, and you could theoretically say, well, we do whatever we want, but you still, sure, I could make this piece of terrain, and I'm like, well, there's probably a world somewhere that looks like this, but people won't buy it unless it has a certain feel to it, right? Yeah. So what would you recommend to somebody? Because I'm doubting that you have a line of chairs and beds and lampposts coming out, unless you do. Do you have a line of chairs?
I can safely say we do not have a line of chairs or beds coming out, or lampposts.
Or lampposts. What, mailboxes?
Well, what I can say is, if you want to know what a chair or bed looks like in the 41st millennium, well, the one thing you can guarantee is it will be covered in skulls, right? Okay, yeah. Because there's one thing that we know about the 41st millennium and the realms of Sigmar is that there is a thin layer of soil around the earth, and then underneath that is just layers and layers of skulls. In fact, if you don't like skulls, you're probably in the wrong hobby.
Well, in all seriousness though, what would you suggest if you were scratch building a chair? Yeah. What would it look like?
That's a great question, actually, and one we may or may not be answering in the future. So.
Gotcha. Man, I want to know now though, because I got to make some. No, it's actually funny because we have a 3D designer just putting together some just 3D printed terrain that we're just going to be selling just on the side, and it's kind of turned into almost a 40K parody, because he comes back and he's like, because I'm like, I want just the stuff that goes in the streets, because we have nice buildings but we don't have anything for the streets. So I'm like a mailbox. What would a mailbox? I'm like, use your imagination. So he comes back and it looks just like a mailbox except it's arches, right, and it spikes on the top. And then he comes back with a telephone booth, but arches and spikes, and there's even a porta potty, and it's just arches and skulls on the side. And I'm just like, this is brilliant, because it's not what it would look like, because it's just ridiculous, but I love it because it's just it just plays to that theme, kind of takes it a little less seriously, obviously. But I'm just like, yeah, okay, yeah, I'll buy that. Everything's just, even the bike, you know how you like, where you like lock your bikes up to stuff?
yeah.
That was just, it was just Gothic arches. And that's what you hook your bikes up to. So that's how I picture. That's where my imagination goes. Everything has to be arches and spikes and skulls, right?
Well, I must admit, actually, when you come to think of the postman in the 41st millennium, I like to think that, because, 40k is kind of like a medieval sci-fi sort of setting, I like to think that instead of having a postman, you'd have like a carrier pigeon, but a carrier skull, like a servo skull.
Yeah, servo skull's kind of going.
Just put your letter in its mouth and it flies off and delivers it intergalactically, obviously. Servo skulls flying through space, delivering letters. Absolutely, yeah.
Nothing on paper, that's too expensive.
Of course.
No, that's true. You probably, there wouldn't be postmen. There would be servitors. Kind of crawling. There's who knows? Who knows exactly what it looks like? And
Milkman be the same. Yeah, servitor.
Yeah,
It's just got massive canister on its back full of milk.
Milk. Yeah. Depending on the world, I don't think I'd want any of that. No. But maybe that's all you had access to. So who knows? Well, that's really cool. So we've talked a little about scenery. So let's just spend a minute or two, and we'll wrap this up. For you got other parts of the scenic area. Now, of course, scenery is my favorite. But if you were to kind of rank the different things that you're over in terms of, I don't know if it's, we'll say sales revenue without, you don't have to give percentages or numbers or anything. Like, what is it the paint or is it the terrain that you find that is more important for the revenue aspect of it?
Our biggest product in the studio by far is our paint range. And you find that paint is our universal product. No matter what system you play, no matter what game you play, whether that be Necromunda, Age Sigmar, 40k, even Blood Bowl, Shadespire, you're always going to need your paint to paint your miniatures. So that is by far our most important and biggest range in the industry.
Who's over that? Because it's obviously you don't have a sculptor, you don't have a 3D designer. Like, who are not necessarily the names of the people, but who's responsible? So you have a chemist who testing out different things and how they apply to things. How does that work internally for coming up with new ideas for products or paints? Because obviously you can't just rely on a range forever. You got to keep innovating and trying to be the best paint supplier in the world. So what kind of responsibility would somebody have in order to develop that kind of product?
Oh, it was actually, it comes from a few different places. So the first person it comes from is my boss, is my boss Dave. Sort of thinks about the different ranges we have, and he looks after the different ranges and the additions to the ranges. But that's kind of driven through painters. So we use the Heavy Metal team a lot for paint testing and paint ideas, and the army painters as well, which make all the wide shots for our magazines and our army books and codexes. And we also have someone in the department that his entire job is to develop paint. So an idea is created, and whether that be a new color, a new technique, a new formulation, or an entirely different, weird and wacky technical paint. And then he sits there and ensures the formulations are correct. Then he liaises with my boss Dave, and then those guys together will think about the look, the design of the pots as well, the technique it's being used for, how to market that, how do we incorporate that into paint guides.
Who names them?
So the naming.
Is it just like a roll the die?
So paint naming is awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, so paint naming is kind of my job. So what we do is we, as a department, we all get together, a big brainstorm, and we just start throwing ideas at a wall. We're like, what about this? And
somebody laughs hard enough, and that's when
yeah, exactly. It's like, what colour is it? It's blue. Okay, so what's blue? Oh, right. And we just start throwing stuff at the wall until stuff starts to stick, and we're like, what if it's Orion blue or Kelgar Ultramarines? They're blue. So what other things are Cassius? And that's what you start. You kind of just start branching out and looking at different names and words that are associated with that IP.
So why not just use normal names for the words? What was the inspiration behind Chaos Black rather than just black? Obviously there's a theme to it, but you also know that there would be the downfall to somebody new coming in and being like, what is Devlin Mud? That's not a name of a color to me. I can of course look at the pot and guess the color of it. So what was the deciding factor in going for creative names rather than the technical names, and knowing that there would be a little bit of a fallback of people not knowing what the names mean? How did that come to be?
No, I think you're right. I think what we try and do with our paint range is try and immerse that as much into our IP as we can. And I think it's just because those names are cooler. if I'm honest with you. As a hobbyist, I quite enjoy the fact that I'm sitting there painting my orcs with a Caliban green, which just sounds so much cooler than it's just a dark green. Yeah. So I know, and Caliban. Oh, what does that do? Oh, wicked cool. And if I add that with my Elysian green as well, and so it's just a cool thing. Yeah. I think it's certainly the way we always thought about our paint colours, and our paint colour names. That's the way I think it's always worked. So you're right. At times it can be a little bit confusing if you first come into the hobby. I think it's about how we market that with our paint guides and how we associate those names with those paints. I think the stuff that Duncan does certainly helps that, and now Peachy getting involved in that as well. It's just phenomenal.
For sure. No, I'm not saying that it shouldn't have been done that way. It's just there had to have been a decision at some point where somebody's like, technical colors would be easier for people to understand coming in, but we want to be cool. Or, I don't know if cool is the right word in this type of hobby, but we want to, because it's very nerdy, which is good. It's a good nerdy. So, but we're going to go for this cool factor of, immersing you in this is what we're about. We're not about selling you a black paint. There's 50 different places that can sell you black paint. We're going to sell you chaos black paint. And I can see where that would come from. So it's just interesting to think that somebody at one point made a decision saying, yeah, normal names, no. Cool names, yeah.
I think obviously historically we've always named our paints cool, IP names, and I think it just made sense to continue that, and I think we always will. I think you'll see weirder and wackier names coming out for paints in the future.
Last question, and this is an important one. Okay. Who finally got it that you should put the symbol on the 6s and not on the 1s? Because for the longest time they were on the 1s, and I would never use your dice. Because that would drive me nuts. I will just say it. I love your scenery, love your paint, hated those dice. But now they're on the 6s. Who was that? If that was you, I won't give you a big hug. But was that you?
So I was part of that decision. That wasn't my decision entirely. Now, let me tell you why we kept them on the 1s. Right. So historically,
Dave loves you.
I was part of that decision, not a fully decision.
That was a partial hug.
But so historically, we always had the symbols on the 1s. Obviously, until recently, and that's not going to change. They're now on the 6s. I guarantee you that forevermore. But the reason why we were so hesitant to change from the 1 to the 6, because if you've got a set of dice that you've bought previously with all the symbols on the 1s, and then we suddenly put them on the 6s, when you roll those dice together, it's confusing. So we kind of hesitated for a while and went, no, it's going to be the 1s. It needs to be the same as previously. And I think the crying out from the community was, it needs to be the 6s. We're not enjoying the dice. It is really confusing. It doesn't make me feel good rolling these dice. And my
I don't want to see my Nurgle symbol when I failed. I want to see my Nurgle symbol when I succeeded. That kind of thing. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think it was a no-brainer. We need to change them to the 6s, and that's what we did.
It seems like that was a case of like HD DVDs coming out at the same time as Blu-ray. There's two ways to do it. They're both correct, because if everybody made their dice with the symbols on the 1, and then just eventually there were so many other people who made their dice with the symbols on the 6s, and that seemed to be the one that took. And so at some point you had to be like, yeah, okay, yeah.
No, totally, and it didn't come from a place of stubbornness. It's trying to come from a place of being sensible, and we're like, no, let's just give them what they want. Let's put the symbols on the 6s. It makes sense. Let's just take that hit and do it. Great.
Well, I will speak for the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of hobbyists out there who say, thank you, we will now buy your dice.
Also, as well, that's a great example of actually your feedback does come back to us. So if you don't like something like that, do tell us in whatever format or medium that you choose, or forum, because it does eventually trickle back to us, and we can make those changes.
It might take some time, but it makes it back.
Yeah, totally. We want to give our customers what they want, and if you want symbols or 6s, you've got it.
Okay, well in that case, Xenos terrain, particularly Tyranids, orcs. I don't know why you don't have a huge line of orc terrain, because that's like, just throw some plastic card in a bin and say, this is an orc house. Cut it with your scissors and stick it together, you're good.
Do you know what's really funny having this conversation is because I know what's coming out for the next 4 years, and you're sitting there making this list, and I'm like, oh God, if only you could read my mind.
And furniture, I want lots and lots of furniture.
Lots of furniture and post boxes.
Yeah, like it's scattered terrain. Honestly, that's my favorite part. It's like buildings; those are easy. Not that, let me like they're awesome. It's not so much they're easy, but you've already done a really good job in those. And so now it's like what do they sit on? And it's funny because for one of our campaigns, I'm like, okay, well, what I'll do is I'll look at a lot of stuff from Warhammer 40k Space Marine, the game.
Yeah.
I'm like, because there you're going through offices, and you're going through everything, so they'll have something. Nope, just crates everywhere. I'm like, so a chair is a crate, a bed must be a crate. It's just a longer crate. And a toilet is just an open crate. So I'm like, I guess crates is just the furniture. Even in the computer game, everywhere you go into like this workstation, and there's just crates.
I'll tell you why, though. It makes it easier for when your world is invaded by Tyranids, or you've realised you've set up shop on a Necron Tomb world. Everything's in crates. You just put the lids down and you move on.
And you got cover.
Yeah.
Oh, and exploding barrels, too. Make sure you scatter crates and exploding barrels next to them, because if there's enemies, you just retreat and shoot the exploding barrel, right?
That's true story. True story. Yeah, absolutely.
That's what happened in Space Marine. So many orcs died because the bureaucracy misplaced their chemical barrels. And I'm like, you know what? Great, thank you. Boom. There we go.
What's funny about Space Marine is you remember crates and barrels from Space Marine, right? So the thing I took from Space Marine was how terrifying bomb squigs are.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Because you can see them over there.
Yeah, but you can hear them.
Yeah.
You know one's there. I find myself just doing circles. Yeah. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? And then explode. Bang. Great. Brilliant.
Yeah. Great game, though. Great game. Well, I think that's all I got for you right now. Thank you so much for the interview. Before I interviewed, I didn't realize that you were over the hobby stuff, and so I got really excited once we started talking about it, because the scenery is my favorite part. And so I love to hear that there's somebody that's just like, yeah, my job is just scenery. It's not like a part-time job of, it's like every once in a while we'll take a break from models and make some scenery. It's like, no, we care about scenery. We're going to keep doing that, and I love to hear that, because that's my favorite part of the hobby. So thank you so much. Good luck. I look forward to the 40K mailboxes and porta potties. Porta potties? Yeah. We can scratch build our own chairs, but porta potties, that's what we want to see. So thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for more interviews on our YouTube channel from other people from Games Workshop. Thanks again, Joe. Happy wargaming.